Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I run Coadec in the UK, which is an organisation that campaigns for policies to support digital startups. And we've heard some amazing stories today of the digital transformations that are going on in Europe. It's become a cliche that sort of everything is being disrupted, but it's worth thinking about because it's true. The way we communicate with one another, the way we travel, the way we buy and sell things, the way we create, consume, and share media. So every aspect of our lives, even how we find love sometimes, is being sort of disrupted by the digital revolution. And for me, one of the exciting things about that is who it is that's driving this. That it's the group of friends in their dorm room or the woman who quits her job because she realizes that she can solve the same problem in a better way. In other words, that it's startups. That the onward march of Moore's law means that barriers to entry in digital have plummeted. Almost anyone can now launch a digital business at almost zero cost. And that's an amazing phenomenon, as Jeremy and others have spoken about already. And we're seeing massive successes in Europe. The number of European startups getting seed funding in the last 5 years has risen 600%. Europe has created $30 billion tech companies in the last decade. And companies like BlaBlaCar, Klarna, Spotify, Shazam, King, European digital successes that were startups themselves not long ago, are all now sort of household names across the world. So we're good at this. This is the good news. You might then ask, what's the role of policy? What are we doing here? Can't we just sit back and relax and reap the rewards of all this innovation and success? And unsurprisingly, my answer is no. We're all here to sort of try and make it better because there are still massive challenges ahead on copyright, on data protection, on infrastructure and connectivity, on digital skills. There are sort of massive barriers ahead. And so I'd like to talk a bit about how policymakers should respond to the digital revolution. Because as well as all those topics I just touched upon, the big worry for me at the moment is that there are two different narratives emerging about technology. And the first is one that's really driven by fear. It sees the digital revolution as this big threat that's coming to destroy our jobs and change our way of life, and the role of regulators is then to sort of try and slow and prevent and mitigate those harms. And of course there's some truth to this. There are sort of forecasts that up to 47% of job categories are at risk of automation. There are these new technologies coming in that we don't quite understand, that are posing new risks either to public safety or privacy. New players are coming into traditionally regulated markets and aren't necessarily abiding by the old rules. But the answer to that cannot be to sort of try and cut ourselves off from digital technology, to say we're going to try and stop this from happening. It would be like King Canute, who tried to stop the waves, the tide coming in. You just get wet. And so I'd like to argue for a more positive vision. I think it's one that everyone here would support, and one that says that, yes, there are some harms and some risks that come from disruption, but more important than that is the enormous opportunity for growth, for jobs, for innovation, for better products and services for consumers. So on the point about jobs, I'd say that the correct response should be to invest in digital skills and to reform immigration systems so that we can make sure that the best and the brightest in the world are working right here in Europe. And broadly on disruption, we should take the attitude that, yes, there are some challenges, but they're challenges that can be met and that we can master in order to deliver that growth and innovation. Because if we try and cut ourselves off, it will just go elsewhere. Everyone else in this global economy is competing. Leaders around the world have cottoned on to the fact that digital matters. And from Chile to Singapore, from sort of European capitals like London, Berlin, New York, Silicon Valley, everyone is now competing to harness digital innovation and sort of win that race. And it'd be a great shame if we weren't a part of that. So how do we deliver that positive vision? I think the first point and the most important thing is for policymakers to listen, to engage, and take part in discussions with digital entrepreneurs and innovators. And that's why it's brilliant that we're all here, and I sort of pay massive tribute to Vice President Cruz and the entire sort of European Commission team for doing this, because it's a great example of that listening. And in the UK, for my part, we've had a government that really has tried to engage with digital entrepreneurs, and that's paid dividends. But it's not easy for government. I know myself, I used to work in government, particularly with startups. There are millions of them. They're small. They haven't got much time, and they're not really used to dealing with government. It's where all the while the big players have kind of in-house lobbying teams. They've got great experience and the time and the industry clout to really engage. So my answer to that in the UK has been to found or sort of relaunch Coadec, the Coalition for a Digital Economy. We were set up by tech entrepreneurs who realized that startups weren't getting a big enough voice in policy debates in the UK. And so, as Anne mentioned a few weeks ago, we launched our Startup Manifesto for the UK, inspired largely by the Startup European Startup Manifesto. And it tried to bring together a united voice for UK startups. And we ended up getting over 200 leading entrepreneurs and investors to back it, including some great names like the founders of King, Shazam, Zopa, as well as investors from people like Accel Partners and Index Ventures. So a real sort of voice of the UK startup community. And that's having an impact. It's making a difference. I came this morning from Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. And just this morning, one of our recommendations has been announced as government policy. We argue that there needs to be a review of regulations surrounding the sharing economy to try and help it thrive, to help companies like BlaBlaCar take off and scale within Europe. And this morning, I'm pleased to report that a biz minister stood up at Tory party conference and announced just that there is a new review going on in the UK into the sharing economy. So the lesson here for me is that when we do unite and come together with a single voice, with a clear set of asks, policymakers do listen. They want the answers. And it's great that similar initiatives are taking place across Europe. We've seen startup manifestos now in Greece, in Holland. There was one a week or two ago in Poland. And I'd encourage everyone to sort of get on board with this. And manifestos aren't necessarily the answer, but when communities come together and speak out their demands, you can get real progress. So while the individual recommendations in my manifesto aren't necessarily applicable across Europe, I think the headings are the sort of 5 key themes. So I'll just go through those quickly. And first off, we call on government to increase access to finance. Because despite the paradox of the digital age is that despite plummeting barriers to entry, in order to scale a business, you really need quite significant amounts of capital to hire the talent that you need to do that. Secondly, is on that point about talent. We call on government to improve access to talent. And that means investing in digital skills and reforming the immigration system so that the best and the brightest do come and work for startups and digital companies within Europe. Third, we call for digital infrastructure to be improved. Connectivity and data is the lifeblood of the modern age. And if consumers and businesses aren't able to connect, then there's no chance of us succeeding. So raising the level of ambition on connectivity is vital. Fourth, call for government to bring laws and regulations into the 21st century. So this is that stuff around reviewing the regulations around the sharing economy. And in fact, one of our recommendations was to make it government policy to support disruptive innovation as a sort of philosophical statement. We support disruptive innovation, but we'll also create the circumstances where people can adapt and change. Because rather than trying to block new entrants, we need to be trying to help people adapt to it. And all too often, I think regulators have forgotten that the point of regulation is to protect consumers from harm, not protect incumbents from new entrants and competition. Finally, we call on government to use digital government to unlock innovation. And I think there's a sort of huge scope for this. We've seen in Estonia digital government really take off. In the UK, we're sort of getting there. But I really see, as government as a platform rolls out across the world, hopefully, government opens up data sets, opens up APIs, and allows others to transact and use its systems, you're going to see a new wave of innovation. So I'd like to just end on an optimistic note that we're at the beginning of this digital revolution. The future that sort of Jeremy painted feels a long way off. But we are at that sort of crossroads, and those two visions I painted of the negative vision of digital dictated by fear versus the more positive one that tries to seize the opportunity, we need to kind of pick a path. And my plea to all of you and to the Commission and to nation states is to join together and help make the positive case for digital policy. So thank you very much.
Excellent speech. Thank you. It occurred to me that probably apologies are first in order because I think I mangled your name. It must surely be Guy.
It is Guy, yes.
Okay, so my apologies. I've lived in Francophone countries for too long. So Guy, I think your point about a more positive vision is extremely important, and I commend you for writing the UK Startup Manifesto. I actually had the pleasure of being, you mentioned the Greek Startup Manifesto, which I think very pointedly was the first country to take the lead, and this country obviously having to rebuild its economy after a very severe economic crisis. What I said at the launch of the Greek Startup Manifesto is that what is different this time is not the high unemployment, is not the almost zero growth, that we're almost in a triple dip recession. What is different this time is that the policymakers will not be able to get the economy going again without the entrepreneurs. And this is a big difference. We can't spend ourselves out of this. We really need to empower that community. And the question that I have to you is, how concretely can that be done? I mean, I think the UK is very much ahead of the curve. But I mean, if I look at the power of sort of the voice of entrepreneurs here in Brussels, it is not exactly the most powerful voice vis-à-vis the vested interests, as you rightly pointed out. What needs to change to really empower your community and the wider community of entrepreneurs?
Sure, that's a really tough question, I think.
That's why I'm asking you.
I think in the UK we really benefited from policymakers who incredibly engaged and listening to the startup community. There were sort of tech city breakfasts in Number 10 almost every month, and entrepreneurs would go sort of streaming in and out of the doors of Number 10, Downing Street. And I think if you're a startup entrepreneur in the UK and you haven't been to Downing Street, you're probably feeling like, what did I do wrong? And that, I think, did lead to real positive change. At the European level, it's tougher. There are startups in Brussels, but there sort of aren't as many as there would be in sort of Paris or Berlin or London. There's a new organization launching shortly called Allied for Startups that pulls together startup advocacy groups like Coadec, like the factory in Berlin, like Startup Italia, and is going to be a new kind of policy voice in Brussels.
Very good.
But I think it's also incumbent on policymakers to make that extra effort to engage. When I was in government, it's really easy just to talk to the big players because they're big and they're simple. There are 5 of them or something, and you can just call them all in for a meeting, whereas with startups, you can't do that. So I'd call on policymakers to make that extra effort just to try and reach out.
Excellent, and I think it's a point that is very well heard. And in fairness, Vice President, you've always done it. So really, a big thanks to you, and a big thanks to you,
Absolutely.
Guy.
Thank you.
So, this concludes the storytelling segment of this session. And one of the key points to grasp, again, is digital technologies, general purpose technology. It will remake our economies, our societies. In fact, it's already well underway. I think that these stories have really, really helped us to drive that forward. And I'm very grateful to all our storytellers. But now let me turn to Julie Cullen, who will moderate a fireside chat with 2 of Europe's most successful digital youngsters. And let me say about Julie that she is a secondary school teacher from Ireland who works diligently on promoting digital literacy in schools. We heard from many of our storytellers this morning what a big issue this is for them, the lack of digital literacy. She is also a young advisor to Vice President Nelly Kroes and serves as the Irish ambassador of the European Code Week. Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Cullen. Julie, there you go.